The rarest of Saturdays in college football is coming. Bold predictions for the second half of the season, and there is a Buckeye Blitz back to the top. This is the College Game Day podcast for Wednesday, October 12th. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel here, and on a day when we have three games featuring teams all 5-0 or better, only the second time that's ever happened, six ranked matchups. Well, of course, we start with a team who has an open date, and Ohio State. Ohio State is, in my judgment, the number one team in the country. My AP ballot, Pete, I moved them back to the top. I've had three different teams ranked there at the top in 3 weeks. And Ohio State has now become, while everybody's paying attention to Penn State and Michigan and Alabama, Tennessee this weekend, Ohio State has become the betting favorite to win the national championship again.
So I have to ask you, Rece, which fan base was more mad that you put Ohio State up number one?
I think they weren't as mad as the Michigan people were that, and they always look at it like you moved a team down. Most of the time I moved a team up. Now, sure, sometimes there are exceptions to that. The week before, when I ranked Alabama number one, I moved Alabama up because of what they did with the backup quarterback at Arkansas. This week, I did move them down because of their performance. That was more about their lack of performance than anything Ohio State or Georgia did, although Ohio State was impressive. Michigan, I didn't really move down. I just moved other teams ahead of them because I thought that they had some characteristics that were a little better than the Wolverines, but you're separating these teams by eyelashes a little bit.
Sure.
But everybody that thinks that you hate their team, they probably think that it's some sort of nefarious plot to set the Buckeyes up to be upset while they're the number one team in the country or something,
Yeah. So let's play hypotheticals here, especially with the Buckeyes on a bye. Alabama with Bryce Young back, we'll assume that's going to happen, rolls into General Neyland Stadium and curb stomps Tennessee like they have done, for a majority of the last 2 decades. Do you the Buckeyes on a bye? They obviously can't. Do you reassert Alabama with their Heisman quarterback with a statement win on the road?
Without question.
Okay.
Because it'll be the best win by far, and it will be their third road win against teams that are either ranked now or ranked at the time. Arkansas is no longer ranked. They were at the time. Texas wasn't ranked. They are. And I've got a big statement coming about Texas later in the podcast too, when we make some bold predictions. So,
all right,
without
is Texas back, Rece?
I think they're on their way, Pete. Yeah. I think they're on their way. I still have some skepticism about winning big games that I need to see, but I've got a sneaking suspicion they're about to get rolling here.
That magic bean is spinning in Austin.
Yes, it is. What did you pick up on Ohio State?
One more poll question, because especially I want to speak to the angry fan. So I was
you love that. You love that.
Yeah, no, you're the nice guy. I have to play the foil. So what Michigan has been sort of this interesting enigma. They have not played a team of their own class. Let's just put it politely that way. What can they show you as a voter against Penn State on Saturday afternoon?
Basically playing the way they played against good teams. Would I like to see a few more big plays down the field, shots from their offense? Sure, I would. But I mean, they still lead the nation in completion percentage. So it's not like the passing game's ineffective. And Blake Corum has been brilliant, and the pass rush. Basically, I want Michigan to do what they've done up to this point in the season, but do it against a good team. And Penn State is a really good team. I'd like to see them hit some more downfield shots in the passing game, but it's hard to quibble over the fact that they lead the nation in completion percentage. J.J. McCarthy can hurt you with his feet. And Blake Corum has been as good, if not better, than any running back in the country. He's been sensational. Sure. But I think the thing that has really sold me on Michigan and their potential to still win the Big Ten is Iyabi Oki, who used to be Iyabi Anoma when he played at Alabama and Houston, UT Martin, I think. He is fulfilling the potential that he had coming out of high school as a 5-star pass rusher. So I think Michigan has all of the ingredients. But I want to see a little more consistency. They pulled away from Indiana, and maybe I'm too rough on Indiana, but I don't think Indiana's very good. And I felt like they sort of hung around with them for a little while and didn't take care of business the way you'd like to see.
Yeah, the Iyabi Oki edition came in August. In it,
right,
during camp. And if there was a glaring obvious searing flaw of Michigan this season, and understandable because of Ada Hutchinson and David Ajabo. 2 first-round picks. One of them didn't end up being a first-round pick. 2 first-round pick talents.
Right.
One of them ended up getting drafted later because of a really unfortunate workout injury in Ajabo. That was like a place where they were vacant. They did not have a plus player there. And so that addition, which was raised some eyebrows at the time because he was well-traveled, has really been a fit. And that was credit the staff there for recognizing the missing piece and going and finding it. I believe it was on August 18th.
I believe he has a coach on the Michigan staff that was with him at Baltimore and that really advocated for him with Jim Harbaugh, and it's been a great fit for him, and he's playing well. But Ohio State, I mean, they're still class of the Big Ten. They're off this week to kind of recruit, maybe get recoup, and maybe get Mayan Williams healthy. Maybe they'll put an end to your weekly college game day Jackson Smith and Jigba update too. Hopefully he'll get well and be able to play.
What the weekly Puka Nacua
update? Yeah, it's like we used to joke about who makes the most appearances playing in those noon games on the warm-ups on game day. Now that you've you've joined us as the authority, as our buddy Pat McAfee says, I think Puka Nacua and Jackson Smith and Jigba now lead the nation in mentions on Pete Thamel updates.
Hard consonants are really probably what is causing their bulky hamstring.
What do you got? What do you got on Ohio State as they enter this off week?
I think it's a really interesting moment in time for Ohio State. Is this like as talented as maybe the 2015 team, the one that lost to Michigan State and didn't go all the way, which was recognized kind of there as the most talented team in the last decade? Probably not. But I think 2 things have stood out when you take sort of a halftime look at the Buckeyes. One is that with Jackson Smith and Jigba dinged up and really only playing like less than an entire game of football because the injury early against Notre Dame and played limited snaps against Toledo. Marvin Harrison Jr. is, to me, the second best sophomore in the country behind Caleb Williams. The NFL is salivating over Marvin Harrison Jr. He is physically an unbelievable specimen. His work ethic is through the roof. Some of those older receivers who went through last year, Olave, Wilson, they credit Marvin Harrison Jr. for their work ethic. So he came in, took 5-star All-American type guys and pushed them and made them better. And as a physical skill set goes, now this is not a knock on Marvin Harrison Sr., who I actually went to college with and I think is one of the great receivers we've watched in the last generation. He was not a physical specimen. Like walking off the bus, he looked, I think, 5'11", 6 foot, like in the, 200. He was not Randy Moss or somebody like that, who was just like a 6'5" freak. Marvin Harrison Jr. has the genetics, that element of it. I mean, he is just a mauler, ball hawk, 6'3", massive, strong, cut guy. So he has all the intangibles, and he's shown that through his production this season. And then obviously, the tactical stuff that he's gotten from his dad, what's the word I'm looking for?
Technique,
technical stuff. Yeah. He's got all that learned with a better physical package. But it was interesting talking to some Ohio State people this week about what makes this team different and what's given this team a little bit of an edge. Because it's always just, with teams as talented, it's always such an interesting, there's always such a thin line between what makes a team work and what doesn't. And I've had a few people mention it to me this year that Cade Stover, the tight end, has really made a huge difference, Rece, in this Buckeye team. He's been fairly productive, right? Now he's not been Michael Mayer productive or Brock, Bowers productive, but he has been productive. He's caught a couple touchdowns. He's been a nice player, but what he has done is proven with his 16 catches, 2 touchdowns. He's averaging 13 yards a catch. He has proven that they have a legitimate threat from that position. And I was told basically opposing teams can't go single high because they have to honor him in the passing game. Now, that's the tangible. The intangible is he is hands down the toughest football player on the team. I was told everybody knows it. Every guy in the locker room, every coach, every manager, every janitor knows he is the toughest guy in the locker room. And that has set a tone in the run game where Ohio State has really become, I think, exponentially better this year. So if he's a brute in run blocking, a threat in the pass game, it's just given their offense a little more dynamism than the typical, 3 first-round picks at receiver that they have, and obviously the Heisman Trophy candidate at quarterback. But sometimes it's those small things. And one last Buckeye thing, a scout the other day told me something interesting. Obviously, everybody's watching Strouds. You chat with scouts about quarterbacks 70% of the time, right? That's just sort of how they're wired, and it's a quarterback world. And Scout made an interesting point to me. He said he feels like Ohio State is an offensive line driven program right now as much as it is a quarterback driven program. And that is not something you would have said about them in the past few years. So Paris Johnson at one tackle, DeJuan Jones at the other tackle. They're obviously NFL players. They are big, massive human beings. But the key is that they're playing together. Donovan Jackson projects as a first round pick on the inside. They have a good center in Luke Weber, but the sum is now equal to the parts. And that hasn't always been the case with the Buckeye offensive line, which has had good individual players occasionally. So credit Justin Fry for coming in and really, really making that unit one of the power forces. Because look, if you were going to play with those other two teams that you're dancing with in that top three that have kind of been playing pull roulette in your pool, Rece, you need to be offensive line sufficient, or you are going to lose. We have seen so many SEC teams over the year go out of league and just devour people up front. So there's a sense with Stover, he changes the dynamism of the pass game in some sense, changes the way defenses play them, and then the line now is a notch improved holistically.
There's a lot there on the Buckeyes. Buckeyes, Pete, I think you're wanting to make sure that you don't feel the wrath of the fan base, as so many of us have over the years with Ohio State. But I'm going to say this. The 2015 team, I think, is held in reverence in Columbus, largely out of frustration because of what could have or should have been. Sure. But you mentioned that you talked to scouts and 70% of the talk is about quarterbacks. Well, I know one place that the 2022 Buckeyes are way better than they were in 2015, and that's at quarterback, the most important position. And I think your point about the offensive line is well taken, because going back into Ohio State history here, when everybody was all up in arms and we had the big argument about whether Michigan should get a second shot at Ohio State in the national championship game in 2006, and then Florida just came in and blew their doors off. Why'd they do that? Because they couldn't block them. And and that's been the whole thing. The whole thing too. Even I think I would even argue that there were probably the biggest deficiency in the 2020 national championship game was like when Sark could get a linebacker matched up on Devontae Smith. That's really not going to work. But I think there were some other areas too with the offensive and defensive lines of Alabama, and Ohio State's been close, and Ohio State might well be setting the standard in those areas. Now they don't have explosive defensive linemen of the caliber of Will Anderson, who is in a class by himself, but Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell are also, in my judgment, both going to be first-round draft picks if they stay on course over the next couple of years. But they've got guys that can slow them down. They won't just be running, if those teams were to meet, they won't just be running roughshod through them the way they do against many.
You could flip on that Texas A&M film the other night to just see some clear paths to the quarterback for Will Anderson.
They did some start. They did some really interesting things schematically too. They felt like they could take advantage of the interior guys for A&M. So it shows the versatility of Will Anderson. They created some things by moving the nose and not even running stunts, just sort of adjusting the front that let Anderson wind up at times being dealt with by one of Texas A&M's interior guys. He can do everything. He plays the run well, just the whole thing. But I think, Pete, the team that scares you, all of these teams scare you, but Ohio State is the one that is frightening, because even if you play great defense, if you're Michigan, Georgia, Alabama, eventually Clemson, anybody else, what are you going to do? Hold them to 31? If you have a great defensive performance, you're going to hold them to 31 points. Otherwise, they're hanging 40 on you. And I know we said that they're scoring 50 on everybody. Notre Dame held them to 21 or whatever, but that's not going to be the norm. That was great job by the Irish to slow them down, but that's going to take a little help from the Buckeyes too. If you hold them, below say 31, even if you're an elite defense.
Yeah. Well, so this would be the last thing I think projecting ahead for the Buckeyes, Rece. They have done all of this without essentially Jackson Smith and Jigba. So again, it's the classic case in sports where others emerge in an absence and then the star comes back. He was the single best receiver, most productive in college football last year. So you add him. Now, Ryan Day lamented a few weeks after that Notre Dame game that they had so much of their play call sheets designed to include Jackson Smith and Jigba that they were caught a little wobbly on the sidelines, play calling wise, when he went out with that hamstring injury relatively early in that game. I think he came back for a play or two, but it wasn't firing. So that, when you add him into the mix for the stretch run, that's where I think things get really tantalizing for what this Buckeye team could become. Because can he be the final piece that unlocks things? Now that you have Emeka Mbuka, who I think is their leading receiver, Marvin Harrison's playing like a stud. Like, you all of a sudden, again, you have essentially what Alabama had 3 years ago, right? You have the 3 first-round picks. Who do you choose? I do think one difference, Trayvon Henderson's obviously an elite back. I do think Mayan Williams gives you a little more of that edge, right? Like that the fact that they were out toughed in that Michigan game last year has resonated in that program. Mayan Williams is a burly brawler. Like, he is a tough running back who gives you a little bit of like a Garrett Blount. Like, I remember living here in New England, like Belichick would not give LeGarrette Blount any carries until November. And then the fourth quarter, like cold games, he would just pound him like 9 straight carries. And so, good luck tackling this 260-pound freakazoid. And Mayan Williams gives them that power element to complement Henderson's speed. So I really think this could be a fun offense to really see take to the next level as they hit a kick where they're going to be tested. Look, they have been tested some more than Michigan, but not fully. There's a chance I think we'll be in attendance for that whiteout game. Big noon game, at Penn State when they play later in the month. I think that's on the that's conversationally on the table, right? Certainly, and not making any decisions, as we know.
Fair enough.
But I do think like that environment is one of the great tests in college football, and I think this Penn State team is very good too. So there's going to be some. Iowa will be a test because of their defense. I know their offense stinks, but because of their defense, they will be a test. So
no, they won't. No, they won't. I mean, come on. That's not going to be a test.
I think it will be interesting to see how their offense performs against their defense.
Okay, well, maybe they hold 31, but it's not a test. There's no danger of them losing that game. It's impossible.
I don't think there is a danger of losing that game. I just think it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting sample set for who they are.
Okay, all right. I'll give you that they'll have to execute against a legitimate, really, really good defense. One of the great shames of the season and of recent seasons is that this Iowa defense is being squandered. What a pity. What a shame, because they are really, really good.
Now, Jack Campbell isn't Will Anderson, but he's like as good of a collegiate defender as, he's a top 10 collegiate defender.
Yeah. And look, I think there is some truth to the notion that it probably helps Iowa's defense that opposing offenses, don't really have to get overly aggressive because they feel like, they know the game's going to be low scoring and close. The one thing you don't want to do if you play Iowa is let the defense score, because the offense has so much trouble scoring. So, but even taking that into consideration, that's a big time elite defense. It's being squandered by ineptitude on offense. It's a shame. Not trying to cast stones at any one person or any one player, because Iowa has good offensive players. They just do. They wouldn't be in the Big Ten in Iowa if they weren't, but probably don't have enough difference makers, probably not quite what they've been in recent years on the offensive line, probably even not quite what they've been at running back. So, just a step or two back, probably a lot of complementary players, and they need a couple of guys who are a little bit more than that, So that's it. We've talked about Iowa, and we've talked about Ohio State, and we've got 6 ranked matchups.
Yeah,
and,
I know.
And other big time games. I want to the big time matchup that's going to get a little bit overlooked, because I know we're going to spend a lot of time on Bama and Tennessee coming up.
Sure,
but the TCU Oklahoma State game, is really a fascinating one. It's the first Big 12 conference game involving teams 5-0 or better since 2015. Do you recall who played in that game?
2015, 5-0 and better. I don't.
TCU and Oklahoma State.
Huh.
How about that? Pretty good.
Huh? Was 15 the year that TCU and Baylor? No, that was 14. The year that Ohio State jumped them with Cardale when they curb stomped Wisconsin. Okay, right. Yeah. So, but that was a good era for the Big 12 right then. That was when the Big 12 was like actually the high flying Big 12. The Big 12 has secretly become like a bit of a grinded out league, and I think Oklahoma State, which has been high flying in its history under Gundy, is now a little bit more like Baylor, like modern Baylor, not Art Briles Baylor. I feel like that high flying reputation has hung around the Big 12 when the reality of that some of the better teams are a little more smash mouth than reputation would dictate. Would you agree with that, Rece?
1,000%. I mean, Oklahoma State last year was an example of that, and so was Baylor, and they played for the Big 12 championship. This could obviously be the first of 2 meetings between these two.
Sure.
Texas is going to have a little bit to say about that. This quarterback matchup here, Oklahoma State and TCU, between Spencer Sanders and Max Duggan. Duggan, along with Hendon Hooker, a couple of guys who've injected themselves into the legitimate first half of the season Heisman evaluation. I've tried to go away from conversation and debate, because you can have, I would say, evaluation is a better word. When you look at you're the one that has been on the Quentin Johnston bandwagon, and rightfully so. And you noted that they moved him to the inside. Duggan's a little more comfortable with slot receivers, and he gets 14 catches, 200 yards, game-winning touchdown against Kansas. What do you see in terms of matching up with this Oklahoma State defense, which not only has a new coordinator in Derek Mason, but also a personnel overhaul? And they do need to be a little bit more high flying than perhaps they needed to be last year. Both these teams are averaging 46 points a game, so you might get a little bit more of an old school Big 12 feel between these two Saturday.
Yeah, well, the thing that would scare me if I'm an Oklahoma State fan is that you sit here and you're 126th in the nation in passing yards allowed. So that's gonna, that could end up becoming problematic. And you are ranked there after playing Central Michigan. They kind of had a dogfight with Arizona State for a while, and then Pine Bluff, Baylor, and then Tech. So I really feel like if you're TCU, you're licking your chops a little bit, because they like to throw it. Now, Quentin Johnson had not been great the first handful of games, but the other receivers at TCU, including Darius Davis from the slot, were dynamic. So I think that's going to be the big test for Derek Mason's defense this weekend is, can you slow down that pass game? Because Sonny Dykes is going to find holes in your pass defense, and they are going to exploit them and pound them. They are not going to, win this game by running the ball. They're going to spray it around the yard, old school Big 12 style. And I really feel like that TCU has just a distinct advantage because it's strength on weakness.
The gross number of yards that Oklahoma State has given up is significant and among the worst, but they kind of make you work for it. They kind of make you throw it underneath. The air yards per attempt of their defense is among the best. So they've done a pretty good job, it seems, of at least making you work to get those yards, make you throw the ball short and so forth. But
bending, not breaking.
Yeah, and the thing is about TCU's receivers is that they can slip one and break you.
Oh yeah,
a little bit. So
yes, yeah.
I'm really looking forward to that game on Saturday too. I think I don't know. I'm leaning heavily toward the Pollock evaluation Saturday. The best team in the Big 12 is going to prove to be Texas.
They have a gauntlet coming up, man. They have a gauntlet coming up.
And I think
we talked about it on Monday's pod.
Iowa State Saturday is sort of the test that you were talking about that Iowa presents even to good teams. I mean, you have to work to beat them, but Cyclones, it's something in the state they can't score. I think they scored 20 points in their last 2 games. They've got 3 games this season when they scored 11 or fewer, and that is not going to work against against Quinn Ewers, Steve Sarkisian led Texas. That's just you're going to have to score in the 30s if you're going to have a chance to beat them. But
Matt Campbell's vultured a few wins like this over the years, though. You know what I mean? It would sort of fit the archetype of some of his more memorable wins. Is like not a lot of expectation. They've been sputtering. They go hit you in the mouth a few times and figure out a way. I'm not necessarily predicting that, but that scenario isn't outlandish.
Bold prediction for the second half of the season, which probably ensures that I'm about to grant victory to Iowa State and Texas. I think come Selection Sunday that Texas will be one of the teams. Texas will be the team that is like USC was. I guess that was in 2016, where they started slowly and everybody said, boy, if you were evaluating on how they are right now, you don't want any part of the Trojans. USC, I think, Texas will be this version of USC. Early season losses, get them. They'll be like sitting there in that 5 or 6 range. And people will say, boy, if they just had a chance when the playoff expands, they'll be the team. I think Texas is about to go on a run. That's my bold prediction for the second half.
My bold prediction for the second half is that the Crimson Tide will lose a regular season game before mid-November, whether that happens at Tennessee Saturday, at home against a dangerous and really not that much talked about Mississippi State team, which is just kind of coming along, eating yards. Will Rogers should be in the thick of the Heisman conversation. I just feel like they are poised to wreak some havoc in the West, the way that they've started. And then they go to LSU. Now, look, we can snicker because we just saw what Tennessee did at LSU, but I think especially if that's a night game in Baton Rouge, and then they go to Ole Miss November 12th. So I don't think, because of the weaknesses we've seen exposed against Alabama, that they can get through that undefeated. And I don't think Alabama's bad, and I don't think they're not going to make the playoff, nothing like that. I feel like there is a regular season loss coming through that gauntlet.
If it happens, it'll be Saturday or in Oxford. All due respect to Mississippi State, I can't get it out of my head that Alabama has stomped them when they've played against the South. They have stomped them out. The other two are danger zones. And if you want to go, who did you play? Who did you beat? If Alabama were to get through, or maybe even just lose to Tennessee, but win the rest and win the SEC in terms of, if you were looking at rankings, wins at Texas, at Arkansas, whether win or lose, if they lose one of those games, either Tennessee or Ole Miss on the road, who's played more elite teams than that, and especially all on the road. Basically, almost all of their difficult games are away from Bryant-Denny Stadium, save Texas A&M, which they sort of made difficult on themselves, to be candid about it, with all of the turnovers and the ill-timed penalties and so forth. But their resume is going to be unmatched. I still think that probably Ohio State scares people more than anyone else, and I think it's absolutely necessary for Bryce Young to be close to 100% for them to win on Saturday, Pete. But the one thing you have to keep in mind, as big as this game feels and as cathartic as it could be for Tennessee, it's not the be all end all for either team. Particularly, it's not for Alabama. Alabama is not a division game. They still win the West if they can navigate the other challenges you mentioned. So it's a big game, and I'm not trying to diminish it at all. And it's going to feel like that, but the loser of this game still has plenty in front of them. Their margin for error is just reduced, and Tennessee's is probably greatly reduced because Tennessee, I think I mentioned this Monday, they could come out of the game with a win against Alabama, lost to Georgia later in the season, not make the SEC championship game, and still have a pretty good case to be among the 4 best teams. So, it's got high stakes, but it's not the loser leaves town match, that we've seen in recent years. So by that standpoint, if you were advising Bryce Young, let's say he's not 100%. I mean, all indications are he's going to play. Let's say he's 75%, but there's a risk take another lick on that shoulder, and then maybe this becomes a nagging, lingering thing the rest of the season. Maybe it's going to be that way anyway. What would you do? Would you try to start it with Milroe if he's not 100% and see how it goes, and use break glass in case of emergency and roll 9 out there?
Well, I'll say this, and I said this on game day on Saturday, the thought was if he didn't play against A&M, he'd be pretty close to 100%. From all I've heard, and again, he won't be 100%, but he'll be in pretty good shape. From all I've heard, things have progressed well this week for Bryce Young. So there's a lot of optimism. Saban has projected that publicly as well. So let's hope he doesn't have to make that decision. They are clearly a completely different outfit with Jalen Milroe. And honestly, Jalen Milroe was more careless than he played poorly, if that makes sense. There were those again, the dynamism isn't there in the pass game, but of course it's not going to be there in the pass game. They're losing the Heisman Trophy, winning quarterback. If he had just sort of tucked the ball a few times instead of coughing it up, it felt like a 24-3 slow Alabama suffocation from 2011 type game. But when you invite the other team back in the game and you give them a chance to, you give them a couple short fields and chances to do what they did, all of a sudden you're sitting there on your own goal line, and you need a really good play by your corner / bad play call / bad route to hold on. So let's hope there's no decision having to be made by Alabama or Young now or later.
And speaking of Bryce Young, Best in Game, brought to you by Old Dominion Freight Line, helping the world keep promises. I don't know if it was a promise, but it was a strong inclination that we might be in Salt Lake City for the USC-Utah game this week for College Game Day. Instead, after the Bruins laid the lumber to Utah on Saturday, now you find a desperate Ute team at home against USC coming in. The Trojans continue to grow, made it to the halfway point. Lincoln Riley had a really funny line the other day when someone made reference to the fact of the next 6 games after starting 6-0, and he said only 6. So clearly there will be a bowl game. There's a potential Pac-12 championship game, and maybe even more for the Trojans. But I don't know that they've looked quite like the offensive juggernaut the last few weeks. They've been explosive at times, but they've really run the ball well with Travis Dye. He's been terrific. This is another extraordinarily difficult environment, and I don't want to make too much. We say, well, it's tough to go on the road. There is emotion that goes along with desperation, and if Utah doesn't win this game, then Utah's season, which I predicted them to go to the college football playoff, and I certainly was not alone, based on their valiant performance against Ohio State and the number of people that they had returning from last year's Rose Bowl team. They won't be out of it because crazy things can happen, and there are no divisions in the Pac-12 this year, but they'll be really close to out of it. And it will feel like a massive disappointment of a season. And out of that desperation, I suspect that Utah will give its best performance of the season, and we'll really find out a little something about SC, which hasn't really been tested by a potentially high-end team yet this season.
Yeah, so I've probably been a little more skeptical of SC than most, in part because I was skeptical of their lines. Like I've said on this podcast, what happens when they get punched in the mouth? Now they have taken and delivered punches at a higher rate than I could have imagined. And honestly, I think if you gave Lincoln Riley a little truth serum, he's probably a pinch surprised at how dominant they've been so far. All the pieces have fit, right? Like when you play portal roulette, there's always some risk involved. Look at Michigan State this year, right? You got a Kenneth Walker one year, the wheel doesn't quite spin as well, and all of a sudden, it's a two-legged tricycle. I'm sorry, two-wheeled tricycle. So it might have two legs the way Michigan State's offense is going. So the thing with SC is this is the ultimate toughness test that you're going to get. Now, look, UCLA certainly declared that they're going to be a toughness test too at the Rose Bowl later in November. So I'm very curious to see how Utah holds up. The player I'm really, really curious about in this game is Cam Robinson. He is your sort of quintessential modern veteran quarterback. He was a really highly regarded recruit out of Southern California. He went to Texas, got beat out by Sam Ehlinger, bounced to Utah. He has been calloused. He's gotten beaten out for jobs, even by Charlie Brewer at Utah. And he is just sort of gone stead forward and really carved a nice career for himself. And he is complete opposite of Caleb Williams, who has just been this sort of searing prospect who captured the starting job around this time last year at Oklahoma and has pretty much gone 100 miles an hour since. And so I think the older, tested, scarred veteran versus the youngster who, look, I think we'd all be stunned if Caleb Williams wasn't the number one pick in the 2024 NFL draft. So I have a soft spot being a veteran college football writer for the guy who's been calloused and the guy who's been tested a little bit and the guy who's been through the ringer, for him to find a little extra juice in a game like this.
SC, the taking the punch thing, and I was skeptical before. I've been a little surprised at how quickly and impressed, not just surprised, I've been impressed with the way the pieces have fit together on offenses quickly. And the defense has had this, fortuitous turn of events in terms of getting turnovers. They recover all the fumbles. They get all the deflections on the interceptions. Their strength of schedule rank is 99. Now, their best opponents up to this point are a couple teams that are sitting that 4-2 range, but nobody thinks that they're juggernauts. This is an untested team in terms of level of opponent. They're wildly talented, but this could be the place where they stumble. But if they don't, you look at their schedule and it's almost impossible to see a loss before that game against UCLA. They finished UCLA and Notre Dame, but after this, they're at Arizona, improved, but absent huge help from USC, the way others have been giving them in terms of turnovers. That's almost an impossible scenario. Cal and Colorado couldn't beat them if they played 100 times each, and then UCLA. So they're going to be looking at 10-0 if they can get through Saturday, and they'll be right in the mix for the college football playoff. And the thing they won't have going for them is they're not going to be the team that, absent everyone else losing twice or something like that, they're not going to be the team that doesn't win the conference championship, has one loss, but is still going to make it in, because they don't have anything on the resume. And by definition, if they do, if they were to do that, that probably means they lost to UCLA late. So I won't say this is the season, but boy, you're going to know if the Trojans are going to be a contender deep into November after Saturday, because there is no way they lose before UCLA. I don't think. Arizona on the road, if Arizona's like +4 in turnovers or some such thing, maybe. I don't see Cal and Colorado doing it at all, even though Cal's improved. But those those teams aren't going to go into SC's house and win the game. Colorado couldn't beat them anywhere. SC might be able to play with 7 and still win that game.
So let me ask you this, Rece. You've obviously hosted endless playoff shows and gone through and more playoff scenarios in your mind than anyone. 1-loss SC at Utah. Can they still make the playoff if they go win the conference title?
If they go win, yes. Yeah.
Okay. I would think so too.
Do that, if they lose at Utah, still make the conference championship game, win the Pac-12, and have wins over, which we assume will still be really good wins over UCLA, Notre Dame's improving at the end, and a conference championship, then yes. Mm-hmm. My point was 1-loss non-Pac-12 champion SC, which will granted will be difficult to do. It would be difficult to be a 1-loss non-Pac-12 champion unless they lost in the Pac-12 championship game or something like that. Just because of the way it's structured, they can't get squeezed out by division or whatever it might be.
Rece, have you pondered it all? Have you caught yourself daydreaming about a sunny late November day and the sun rising over the San Gabriels, or maybe setting for like the perfect LA Bowl undefeated college game day set right outside the Rose Bowl? Have you caught yourself daydreaming of LA being the center of the college football universe?
Yes. Now, I don't know if we would do game day. Probably that's Thanksgiving weekend. We might do it at the Rose Bowl, just as we do that New Year's morning show every year, which is always one of our favorites, mostly because we're usually punchy from the playoff games the night before or the late trip in. And secondly, because it's like a kind of like a show and go. But that's probably the only place where an empty stadium provides atmosphere. And, and we have that. Yeah. And I don't know if it would, if we would do it at the Rose Bowl or do it on campus in one of the places or some other.
They did a great job on campus last year, right?
Yeah, they did. Mostly because, the crowd was great. But the most memorable thing about that to me was my great friend Bill Walton coming on as a celebrity guest picker. I mean,
does Bill Walton like to talk? I don't know this.
Bill was phenomenal. I've got a couple of great Walton stories. I'm actually scrolling through my phone right here. Here's something I got from Bill. Because I like the Grateful Dead, but I would not say that I'm an aficionado as Bill is. So I did a little homework here and there and made a reference or two during the show. And one of which Bill missed on a little bit. So I get this text afterwards. Should I read this in Walton voice as best I can?
Please,
I don't do a great Walton, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I made a Grateful Dead reference, and Bill thought I was referring to a different song than the one I was actually referring to. So this is the text I get from Bill. My deepest apologies. Recently, when I was on your show, you made a beautiful, graceful, and deft Grateful Dead reference, and I butchered it by misidentifying the song. I goofed by saying Althea when I should have said Help on the Way, which is what I really need. I am so sorry. And I apologize for ruining a magical moment and perfect everything by you. I beg your forgiveness and that the rest of the known universe as well. I'm sorry. I hope we can still be friends. Thank you for my life. BW.
You just basically summed up why Dave Pasch is bald.
I love Walton. Bill is one of the kindest, most hilarious people you'll ever run across. Oh, I love the guy. He's a brilliant. Yeah, he's his own guy. And that Saturday, he absolutely busted tail to come and be part of the show. We asked him to.
Oh, really?
He went way out of his way, and I'm eternally grateful to him for doing that. But he's just a hilarious guy. I'm not sure Lee Corso knew what hit him when Big Red was out there spreading his arms and welcoming the Bruin faithful, the great John Wooden, Pyramid of Success. So hey, if we can get Bill back on the show and have a great showdown in LA, maybe both wind up undefeated in there, though Oregon might have a little something to say about that when
it's not fait accompli.
No, not at all. But
it's starting to get dark at 5:30 in Boston. So a nice November day or two out in LA doesn't sound too bad right now.
Yeah, you could sell me on that as well. I mean, late November, and it would also be good for the sport and a little bit of a gut punch. I think we might have mentioned a little bit of a gut punch for the Pac-12 to watch the two teams exiting for the Big Ten. And the thing is, maybe the first of two meetings in a span of 3 weeks. If things fall right. Play twice. So.
No. Well, Eugene is obviously on the list for next week, so I don't want to. We don't want to overlook that as a. That I think that's maybe my favorite venue to watch a game. It's certainly like the noise stays in just a different way. And it's just one of the reasons I like it. Then we'll talk about this more, but it's just so different. You walk in and you've got like the beautiful, like lush forests in the background. Like the backdrop's so different. There may be a small waft of marijuana in the air. Bill Walton approved when you stroll through the tailgates in old Eugene. So it's just that's what makes college football great. That's a whole lot different than Starkville. Let's put it that way.
I would like to clarify that my friend Pete, my new best friend Pete, did not say that marijuana is what makes college football great, because that I would not agree with. But anyway,
no, what makes college football great is that they were drinking Busch Lights when I was out on the stage in Kansas, and just people tailgate differently, and that's because it showcases the diversity of our great sport. So
moonshine and Moonshine Mountain cookies coming for a return trip to Knoxville. I'm giving them a plug. I'll be expecting some more freebies.
I was told that Luke Combs got a supply of moonshine from the App State football coaching staff. They know how to take care of their A-list celebrity donors. So
that's you just breaking knowledge. Did you put that on a tweet on GameDay?
I didn't. I found out that later.
Okay.
That transaction had occurred. So it didn't reach the level of an analyst hire, so I didn't tweet it.
This is a remarkable Saturday coming up, one that we've rarely seen in the history of the sport, and it's going to make it difficult to make picks, which is what we're going to do on Friday on the podcast. Are you, with a little more time to think about it before we go, what's the one that you're grinding over the most, trying to decide who you think is going to win among the big games? Bama, Tennessee, Penn State, Michigan, Oklahoma State, TCU, SC, Utah, and I'll throw Mississippi State, Kentucky in there, Clemson, Florida State, maybe. But Mississippi State, Kentucky is the other ranked matchup. I think Clemson, Florida State might have a little more juice than that. But what are you grinding over a little bit more?
Michigan, Penn State, I think, would be the grind in my mind, just because Penn State's run defense has been so good. And that is clearly still, I know Michigan's past numbers, efficiency-wise, that is still like, if I want to see how Michigan reacts if their run game gets stoned. I don't think anybody has been able to go toe-to-toe with them physically. So, but if you look back non-COVID to Penn State's history in Ann Arbor, it is pretty sordid in the Franklin era. So all those things, I looked at that game for a while early this morning, and all those things were sort of bouncing through my head. So what about you, Rece? What is conundruming you?
I think that one. I think that's probably it for me as well. That's the toughest one. I think Alabama, Tennessee is also difficult because you look at the Tennessee game that they played them last year, and they hit them for shot plays. Tennessee had a grand total of 10 first downs last year in that game. Now, they also had like a 70-yard touchdown and one almost 60. So you're not going to get a lot of first downs there. But they didn't do much, but they hit those big plays. I also think that Tennessee's defense is a little bit better than it gets credit for, because they give up a lot of yards passing. Well, there are a couple of reasons for that. One is because you don't run on them very effectively, and the other reason is because people have been behind, right? So they're throwing a lot. And the other component is that when your offense runs a play every 20 seconds, which Tennessee's offense does, your defense is out there for a lot of snaps, which means the other guy's going to get some yards. So I think you kind of go, and look at some of the stats like yards per attempt, yards per rush, and they're not as bad as you might think looking at the old school gross number of stats. And, Alabama's had some issues, obviously, with turnovers. They've had some issues with drop passes. Those type things won't fly against Tennessee. Here, I've got the numbers. Tennessee's allowing under 2.8 yards per rush. Alabama's had to rely on the running game a lot with their inconsistency at wide receiver. They've given up yards, but they have had a pretty good pressure rate in terms of getting a little bit of heat on the quarterback. So there are a lot of things there that point to Tennessee, but then the recent history between the two, and the fact I've always fallen back on this the last couple of years. When in doubt, Alabama has Bryce Young, and you don't. And if they do indeed have a healthy Bryce Young, then maybe that's the difference. I'm grinding on that one a little bit too, though.
Yeah, that's fair. I am looking forward to the visceral environment at Tennessee. There are certain fan environments that you hear, and there are certain ones you feel in your lungs reverberating through. And I am expecting that angst, desperation, generational failure to all be pent up.
Generational failure.
Well, they've had a generation of failed football.
I know.
I mean, it's been, if you are a sophomore at Tennessee and you grew up in, the Nashville area, you have never seen Tennessee be relevant in football.
Yeah.
Generally, like
probably some early recruits, people getting their first sniff in camps have never seen Tennessee beat Alabama.
Yes. That's
a little bit
certainly like if they did, they had a diaper on, right?
Yeah.
Like,
speaking of generational failure, have you seen the Tennessee fan who put out the rap on TikTok? Now, I'm not on TikTok. I have no desire to be on it, but some of our game day colleagues sent me this rap from this guy who has a giant tattoo of Smokey on his chest, and he's sitting there and he's shirtless so that we can see this, and he produces perhaps
we're gonna have to play it because you're not gonna do it justice. We're gonna have to have we're gonna have to have Taylor play the rap.
It is brutal. I can send Taylor something that I don't like to give away what we might do on the show. But
okay.
I took no, it's okay. I took like 15 minutes last night and took this rap and inserted quotes from the famous "I Hate Tennessee" guy from 2009, the Alabama student. You've seen that one, I'm sure, right?
Oh yeah.
So I took it and I just ham-handedly slapped in the things back and forth and said, what if we do something like this? Obviously we need to edit it, make it look slicker, but it is a brutal attempt at creativity. That's the College Game Day podcast for this Wednesday. Back on Friday with the great Bill Connolly to make some picks for Pete and Rece and Taylor and everybody at our great podcast group. Please download wherever it is that you like to procure your podcast, and we'll see you on Friday.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.